I'm very pleased to introduce Pierluigi Turco. Unfortunately, Andrea Rossi couldn't join us today. He's ill. But I will just say a few words about Pierluigi and the A-Fact factory. So Pierluigi and Andrea Rossi, who couldn't be here, first met here at the AA while they were studying SED in 2015. They were both my students. And after that, Pierluigi stayed in London and worked with SOM for several years. And Andrea Rossi, after a couple of years, went back to Italy and worked several years with Mario Coccinella. But since 2022, they decided to join together with Giovanni Sana and formed their practice A-Fact factory. So, well, since then, the practice has already achieved a significant milestones, including winning several prestigious competitions, international competitions, such as the Museum of Contemporary Art, Natural History Museum, and Park of Arts and Culture at Montenegro, as well as the Bertaglia Lazzaretto, a social housing project in Bologna. And, well, Pierluigi will tell us a little bit more about the approach and methodology of their practice and how they came to all these accomplishments. Please welcome with me Pierluigi.
Thank you, Paola. Hi, everybody, and thanks for staying late. My name is Pierluigi Turco. I'm very happy to be here and to share our work with you. Our practice is very young. We are just 3 years old. And we met, as Paula said, in 2015 during a SED course at the Architectural Association. And we have been started our collaboration since then. Now we are about 11 people, and our practice is based in London and Milan. So we come from different professional paths. Myself, I started my career as an engineer, and then I transitioned into architecture after moving to London. And since then, I've been working as an architect, first in SOM and then in A-Fact. On the other side, other people, Andrea and Giovanni, they started as architects. They moved into an engineer field for a while, and then they went back to architecture. So we have a diverse background, and this diverse background gave us the opportunity to be exposed to projects in different ways, from the engineering perspective, the sustainability perspective, but also from the architectural perspective. So we like to work in a little bit of a hybrid space in between the disciplines. Our philosophy is based on this book, A-Fact, Factfulness. And we came together after reading this with a strong idea that was kind of bringing our past together into one approach. This book, it's kind of a very famous book, but it explores common misconception about global trend and use data-driven insight to challenge pessimistic view about the world. But at the same time, it offers practical ways to understand, and by using a A-Fact-based perspective on progress, inequality, and human future, gives possible solution. Just to give you an example, a couple of projects presented today by the SED students were about slums, and actually I had a very strong misconception about that, thinking that the inequality and the number of places like this was actually increasing in the world. But if we look at statistics, is actually, especially in India, is a process that is going down, is decreasing. So if we look at other phenomenon, we can see that things are not so bad as they are described by the information we received. We can say our first AFACT project was born out of our dissertation. In 2015, we were focused on addressing a very, I would say, stringent challenge of our day, that was migration and how to deal with migrants coming from the sub-Saharan Africa into Europe, into the south of Europe. And this was the first project where we gave a solution by cross-referencing data on about the seasonality of migration, but also climate data, and we put together to develop a hybrid architectural solution that could be working as a migrant center during some period and as a school during other periods. I think here at the AA we learned how to understand buildings, and we started to have a pretty, I would say, clear idea of what we wanted building to be. We understand that some buildings were designed with a specific set of conditions, such as these two here from SOM from the 80s. On the left, National Commercial Bank was probably the first office building with a completely opaque facade in a harsh climate, such as the one of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. But it was very clever in the way it was opening up through this courtyard carved into the building. So it was sustainable in the way it was interpreting and understanding the climate. On the other side, the Hajj terminal was also a great example, but not only about the way the architect managed to approach the climate through this flexible Bedouin tent-like structure, but also the adaptabilities. The Hajj terminal is an airport, and it's an airport that needs to welcome all the pilgrims that are coming for the Hajj, so during the Ramadan in Mecca. And so the idea was to create a flexible structure that could expand the activity of the airport also outdoors. What was interesting about this building, and I think it's key, it's what we are trying to achieve in our work, is that it was able to be resilient during COVID, because most of it was open air. And today is even used as the base for the Islamic Biennale in Jeddah. So he has this ability to adapt and to be resilient to different needs and different moments. But also, when we look at sustainability in a different way, there are some buildings that maybe they don't reflect directly with the climate, to the climate, but they manage to engage a complex dialogue deeply rooted in the reality of their context. And we believe that architecture is rarely impactful when it's just a dogmatic idea, but it always emerges from a dynamic system of tension between practical needs, context, history, material, and human aspiration. We also think that reality should not be seen as a limitation, but rather as a rich source of inspiration. And architecture, like we see on the right, should not impose itself, but should acknowledge its vulnerability. So that vulnerability could be an added value. And you'll see in the next project that I'll show that we're trying also to get to that point. So after understanding the building and see what the building can tell us, what the surrounding, what we can tell back. So this presentation focuses mainly on some aspects that I found being key when translating the environmental design methodology into the profession, because the profession is not affected only by the environment, but is affected by many other forces. Our ambition is very high, and we know as architects it's very difficult to achieve that result, and often collides with the reality of the profession. I think what we learn here is that as architects we need to solve this problem for the people. You can see on the right image of Russell Square on the left, an image in a not really well-designed urban space in Mexico where all the people are trying to stay on the shaded area. But also we need to solve a problem for the environment, and we are very aware that just the phase of construction of the building, the first 2 years, if we think about 100 years building life, can affect 41% of the emission of that building. And the next 70 years, the operational carbon is going to affect 50, it's going to take 50% of that share. So these things are starting to be relevant today, and I think we need to acknowledge all aspects of it. And finally, I think another person we always talk to is the client. And when you talk to the client, you need to be sustainable also for them. So we use this chart, which we take from Chapman BDSP, that is showing how not always trying to achieve the maximum, the best result in terms of sustainability brings the best solution in terms of cost. But sometimes there is a sweet spot where we can achieve good result and still being very attractive in terms of cost. And finally, solving the problem for the future means looking not only what's going on today, but what would be the challenge of tomorrow. Things like pollution, it's something that it's going to be solved through electrification of the different system, but biodiversity, water, and waste and energy will be the most pressing challenge. So our building should possess all those qualities together, and we mimicking a TV program. We call it the A factor, which means the ability of the building to possess and harmonize all these aspects together according to the different cases. So after this introduction, I'm going to show three projects that we have been developing recently, and they will be soon on site. And this project talk about three challenges for the architect today. They talk about building light, building community, and building ecosystems, which we think are very pressing challenges for contemporary architecture. The projects are located around the Mediterranean. As you can see, our office in Milan and London, but these projects are in Palermo, which is my city where I come from, as Paola mentioned, Bologna and Montenegro. So the first project is the new maritime station in Palermo. The city of Palermo is a really interesting context. It's rapidly evolving from an industrial hub into a vibrant touristic destination, and is trying to reconnect the city to the water through a dynamic waterfront. So this project came because the Port Authority asked ourselves to design a functional expansion of the existing cruise terminal that could be used only as a luggage laydown space. So it was just functional space for the building. So after a few meetings, we saw there an opportunity, and by basically checking the time that actually the building was in operation, we were supposed to create a building that was in use just from 5 a.m. till 12 a.m. And also thinking about Palermo climate. Palermo climate is very mild, it's Mediterranean, with relatively mild temperature in summer and a very strong solar radiation. So our first idea was to, first of all, to use all the time, the building. So we proposed the client to use it as a multifunctional space for events that could actually bring a revenue also for them. And at the same time to build something that was really light, a roof that could protect from the sun. So starting from, you can see the original building, which still function, and the extension as a temporary structure in front of it. We started from the prescribed dimension. We built the notional volume that was needed by the Port Authority. And then we create a roof that was based also on the movement of passenger entering the building and then going out from the site. But then we thought that the building could have an interesting kind of way of welcoming the cruisers who were coming to Palermo. And so this was the first thing, because this was the first thing they were seeing once they arrived. So our challenge was to create something a little bit more extraordinary out of a really standardized element. And the building was also has to be very much inspired by the surrounding port, with its cranes, the movement of the wind, the reflection of the water. So we took all these elements, we bringing together this data, and we ended up with this pavilion that it's all about giving value to a temporary structure, so very simple pieces put together, but also embracing the nature of the building as a temporary building, ephemeral in so many ways, and something that could be used by the community. We analyze the overhang in a way that to find the optimum balance between the economic efficiency of the cantilever and the solar radiation values that were dropping into our glazed surface. We want the building to be glazed. The client was pretty much forcing that as well. But also we wanted to create a building that with the structure, with the architecture, and basically with the form could also act as both an environmental design, a structural device, and an architectural device. So we wrapped the building up with a series of very thin columns, which worked also as a shading device on the east and west side, and a very deep roof act to protect the space below. So with natural ventilation, the building could be free running. However, we had to provide, because it was a technical space, we had to provide mechanical ventilation. The plan of the building also resembles the one of a temple with you can see the simple modular structure and repetitive. And we worked a lot with the materiality to use material that could reflect and emulate a little bit the environment of the harbor, and so the building could change and reflect what was going on around it. This is another image that we create recently that brings together this idea of the frame of the background, this object as an abstract presence into the port, but also everything it's very, I would say, temporary, and this idea of ephemeral is emerged a lot in the project and became also kind of a strength of it, because all the elements were easily assembled, and the building could, the structure you can see is used just repetitive elements, and the idea was that we were designing for DFMA and DFD, so for assemble, construction, and then to dismantle the building and probably building it somewhere else. And we did some studies also to calculate and reduce the amount of carbon and pieces that were needed to build this structure. And with empirical numbers, we came to the number of 512 tons of CO2 that are needed to produce this steel, and that could be saved every time the building is reused. So this is the last image showing kind of a night event in the building. The second topic, which is a project that is the result of a competition that was held, I think, few months ago, for the largest social housing project in Italy since the 90s. The complex comprises 7 plots and a total of about 220 units including the student accommodation and elderly accommodation and families. It's located in Bologna, and again, in Bologna is a quite interesting city, very active, with the community components is really strong. And in Italy, social housing often carries a stigma. There are only few truly successful examples that challenge this perception. But as you know, Italy is a quite country that has a strong heritage of historical center and active community. So we knew that this was a new project after 30 years, and our challenge was to combine the economy and the functionality of the social housing, because the budget is very low. We're talking about 1,500 euros per square meter, while ensuring variety and fostering a vibrant and a thriving community. The master plan, we inherited the master plan. It was the base of the competition, and it was a project from the 2000. The brief required us, it was based on this idea of perimeter block, which they called insulae, but then the compound of social housing was already there. Imagine something a little bit separate from the rest of the master plan. So the brief required us not to change the insula layout to avoid the delays in the approval and in the construction. So, but at the same time, it was asking for a new, sustainable, and happy community that could be a symbol for future development in Bologna. This is kind of this is one image of the site. A few of those plots are already built by private investors. And we had to act basically in a place where there was no really contest. I mean, it was there only on paper. So we started with the original brief that was given to us, which basically proposed a quite monotonous sequence of building of the same height and that surrounded a parking area. And kind of a very modernist approach that prioritizes standards more than actually quality or human scale. So our first intervention was, which was done by many other, of course, in the competition, was to free up the central space and to create what we call urban courtyard, a cortile urbano, that was conceived as a green area designed to be the heart of our community. But also we were thinking about moving the parking around at the street level in a strategic way to allow us to patrol and oversee some areas that were not really active. The second step was to change the shape of the building to reconnect the master plan with the brother city by restoring also historical pathways, such the one along the river, which became a cycle route that could connect in 15 minutes this part to the historical center, to the city center. And we also started to adjust the prescribed building volumes and strengthen a little bit those connections. But then I think the move that really was successful and was really appreciated by the jury was the way we redistributed the density. By playing with this C and L shape, we were able to introduce a height variation with this central space. Finally, we introduced further fragmentation of the volume, and we transformed those shared space and connection between the building into basically hubs for social interaction. Residential blocks were equipped with rooftops and with greenhouses to support the urban agriculture, which was a strong element also in Bologna, a strong activity that is present in Bologna. And I think by doing that, we also bring that to a little bit of extreme by using color to reflect the rich variety of Bologna Historical Center, but we were also careful in matching the hues found in the city. And I think it gives also an idea of sense of belonging for each of the inhabitants of each of the building, and a sense of identity for the whole development. So the final result was this: the central space was given to courtyard, to landscape, and one very important focus was on how the building were touching the ground, because this was the part where the actual community was going to be created. So we plan and design, and now we are working with the council to understand which activities are going to populate this ground floor. But part of the brief was to envision some of them. So we basically lay out the whole ground floor. And the idea was to prioritize the activation and also creating this space of connection and relationship between the different buildings. In terms of moving from the urban scale to the building scale, another important aspect was this transition of scale. And even the corridor space, as you can see here, of some of the building were used as a space where activities could be carried out. And especially greenhouse and growing herbs, it's something that is pretty common in Italy. The design, as you can see, it completely changed the perspective with which the original brief was done. It's a proposal that plays a lot on variation in colors, in activities, in size of the building, and to optimize the functionality, we chose not to include balcony, because this was related both to the idea of bringing people together in a common rooftop or on the ground floor, but also related to the very strict budget that we had. And we know balconies are quite expensive when it's about that. But also we observed that most of the time balconies are misused as storage when they are not generous enough. So we prefer instead to dedicate storage space in the basement and keep the building free from balcony. And this was also a choice that was a lot appreciated by the jury. All apartments were designed with a 30-40% windows to wall ratio, and this was a value that we found through literature to prevent overheating and minimize heat loss during the winter period. And in terms of typologies, we use a combination between typical typology that is a block, we call it in linea in Italy, which is basically a core that gives access to maximum 2 to 3 apartments. But also in order to achieve the density, we had to add also a corridor building. So our unit, our typology became almost an hybrid between these two buildings. As you can see here, the building has one core, and then the core has access directly to 2 apartments, but then you could access through a corridor all the other 3 apartments. So each unit presented was based on a modular system, a system that supported a timber structure. We are still challenging that because timber brings a 30% increase in cost. And so we are still deciding where we want to spend most of our money is in giving in improving other aspects of the building, or if we want to go for a timber structure. But the idea was that all the apartments were laid out to have cross ventilation, so to reduce overheat and to minimize the need for mechanical ventilation. As you can see here, all the apartments have 2 sides, and then the corridor was allowing the access to the block on the right. Again, the project emphasized off-site construction to reduce on-site construction time and streamline building processes. So the idea of design for manufacturing and assembly principle was kind of brought as far as possible by using a modular facade system, precast, prefab, but also prefab structure and pod for toilet and WC, and the stairs of the core. So this is kind of the final image that shows this active ground floor, the timber structure that becomes also a kind of feature of the development, and this idea of dynamism and variation that we want to recreate in this new eco-district. So the third project is also the result of a competition that we won 6 months ago. We were selected among different proposals from international practices such as Snoetta, Diller Scofidio, and Renfro, Su Fujimoto, Ishigami, and Larsen, Mario Cucinella, and Boeri. And I think the successful part of this was that we were really playing almost another match. We were trying to build an ecosystem rather than building a building. The project, as I said previously, is located in Montenegro, in Podgorica. Podgorica, it comprises three cultural districts with the 3 distinct museum buildings, a botanical garden, a public riverfront promenade, and a second phase focused on additional cultural building. So it's both the scale of the master plan and the scale of the building. Podgorica, the capital of Montenegro, is characterized by its relatively limited urbanization, but a strong component is the striking natural landscape, including mountains, the river, the Moracha, which is the main generator of the city, and the lush valley. You can see the city is what you see in this picture, so there's not much to it. And the urban development can be understood as a sequence of 3 historical layers. The Staravaros, which is the one on the bottom, which is the whole city. The Nova Varos, which is the real center of the city, characterized by the perimeter block and the courtyard block. And then the Novigrad, which is the new city that was created you can see on the west side during the Soviet period. The site we had to deal with was a kind of in between this city center and the natural landscape surrounding the area. As you can see here, the Moracha River serves almost as a natural but also physical, in a way, strong access to the city. And the hills and the valleys, like the Gorica Hill, are basically going down toward the river. The site was strategically located along the river and was part of as you can see here, as a vital almost green infrastructure. And it almost didn't call for a building itself, right? But to be part of the natural landscape. So for us, it was evident that to succeed in this competition, we have to create a connection and balance. On one side, the preservation of the already existing ecosystem and trying to organize the site in a clever way so that didn't interact much with that. So our first approach was to collect data on all the trees that were on the site. There was a previous study that was given as a brief. but with our landscape design land, we went a step farther, and being able to categorize the different trees according to the actual importance that they have on the site was key to generate our proposal. So basically the three questions we asked ourselves was, how do we connect the city and the river? How do we connect the green system? And how do we create a public attractor? All ingredients that needs to converge to create a new anchor in a city. So I'll go through. I managed to find all the sketches that we had for the competition, but I think they are very good to explain what was the process behind it. There was a central area park that was the right place to connect the site with the city. At the same time, it was the place where all the most important trees were located. So we started from there as a kind of point to organize our master plan. And of course, the idea was to create this continuous platform that could connect the whole site together. So the building had to be in a way placed in a clever way to let the nature go through them, and not to create barrier, but to be in a way hidden within this landscape. So this kind of evolved in a series of drawings that were from which emerged an idea of creating a side from the river that was pretty much inspired by what was happening around. So the riverside was more mineral because of the erosion of the water, and the parkland from the city was kind of trying to contrast that. And then again, this system becomes more and more clear until we finally place buildings that were generated by the land itself. And then on the other side, this building could kind of become stronger, and their presence could be more alive and real and strong. So they have this monumentality, which is pretty much needed for a cultural building. This diagram shows the overall site development. With the building that he has tried to find that point as a generator, but then they adapt to the context. And plan-wise, here we can see these two forces converging together, and actually all the green side on the south kind of merging with the more eroded and mineral side on the north, which then was transformed into a promenade on the riverfront. The plan of the building were conceived in a similar way, and what was interesting about them was that they all shared the same idea of transitioning from the green park to the river walk, and this was done was curated as an experience for the lobby of the museum. So looking at the building from the park, you could see almost some hills, and you can transition into that. We use this slogan, the park is the museum and the museum is the park, because it was part of the brief to create also an outdoor active space where arts could be exposed. And then the entrance, almost in a mysterious way, becomes almost something hidden within this landscape. But then by looking from the other side, the more mineral side, we could see a more active promenade where the bar and the shops of the museum were located. So he has this kind of dual aspect. On one side, the river, the other side, the park. And going back to that study of the trees, we actually the landscape design was featuring a blue and green infrastructure, and we did a thorough analysis to integrate natural features to enhance the park biodiversity, and we count all the trees. We preserved 290 mature trees, and we planted in our proposal 532 new trees plus and bushes, shrubs, and other species. So we understood that since the building was less important and the park was more important, the comfort had to be designed also outdoors. So the idea was to achieve that variation in terms of condition and the comfort level, but also of spot with different atmosphere. And as you can see, naturally, the part that becomes more shaded was the entrance to the site, and this was also affecting the kind of activities that were being developed in that part. But creating this variety through trees was kind of the analytical work we carried out to achieve a comfortable park. And yeah, this is a view from the top. We can see how the buildings start emerging from the ground, but also how the transition between the level of the park and the level of the river was curated. And actually, this was also coming from a source of inspiration from the part of the city that was the oldest. So the vernacular approach to the Morasa River was in the Ottoman city was very playful, and it reminds what Carlo Scarpa was doing, for example, in Venice, right, with playing with different level. So we want to make that idea, the experience that the visitor would enjoy when they arrive to the site. The notional section was really simple, something like this, and you can see the level of the river that can be pretty dangerous during the different season, but also we thought that was part of the experience, to experience the river in different moments. And again, the public non-ticketed area was transitioning from the park level going down into the river walk level. And also we wanted to maintain this experience of being outdoors, right? So the museum lobby was designed to connect the two different levels, but also always maintaining this strong connection with the outdoors. So with the skylight on the top, you could almost see the river from the entrance of the building from the park. And bringing back that idea of the vernacular way to approach the riverside, we also emphasize this experience of going through the building as something really playful and strong in the proposal. In terms of phasing, the project was also kind of there was this aspect of phasing was really appreciated by the jury, because economic sustainability was a strong aspect of it. And so our proposal was conceived in a way that it could be phased and still be valid. So the first phase was for the biggest building, the Museum of Contemporary Art was working alone, and then we could have the second phase, which was just another building, and then the third phase, having also a strategy on the rest of the infrastructure. Finally, the first phase is supposed to start in 2027, and then we don't know how much is going to go farther. So finally, I have a small video that we present in Montenegro last month to the municipality, and it shows a little bit of the environment and the atmosphere of the space. This was the last slide. I think you've seen 3 different projects that were on purpose put together for this presentation. But I'd like to conclude the presentation with this quote from the book Factfulness. Again, this is not a book from an architect, but I think it's still very valid for us. And as you can see, say, beware of simple idea, simple solution, and welcome complexity, combine idea, compromise, and solve problems on a case-by-case basis, which I think is also the spirit of the SCD course in a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierluigi, for the fantastic and inspiring lecture. I will now open the floor for questions or comments. Please let me know, and I give you the microphone.
Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. The first one is about the project in Montenegro. I was looking quick while you were looking at the pictures of the city. If that gets built, it will probably be the most important building on the city after the mosque in terms of monumentality, etc. So you kind of touch upon the timescales, the political difficulties. If you can give it a bit more, information about what and if will happen in your mind. Second question, I think you kind of anticipated it with this beautiful quote, but in many instances in academic settings of any discipline, you think a lot about principles, ideas, etc. But tactics and strategies to deal with the client that says no, the politicians that doesn't want your color or your design, etc., kind of gets a bit on the side. I'm sure you have a plethora of tactics and suggestions for people defending their designs in front of politicians, and also the budget constraint. But if maybe you can share one or two, the biggest one that you learned along the way so far. You know, if I were a student, what do you think one should focus on to defend a design choice or a budget choice? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay, first question about Montenegro, right? So Montenegro is a very interesting place at the moment. It's going through a quite fast growth and is trying to is aimed to become part of Europe, right? So it's already adopting euro, even if it's not the official money they are using. So when we went there, this competition was we are very positive on this competition because it was they spend a lot of energy on it. So the competition had 5 invited architects, which were the one I mentioned, so Diller, Scofidios, Noeta, etc. And they were paid for participating to the competition. All the other proposals were kind of trying, so we were just trying to win this competition, but we didn't have any compensation, right? So they also spend a lot, and this is one of the reasons, going back to why we choose also this competition, because the brief was very well written, and you can see that there was some interest in kind of building this project, because this will become the symbol of, in a way, a new moment for the city, the most important cultural building. So we are expecting, so at the moment the site, so to be more specific, the site at the moment is changing its use, so they are approving the change of use, because they don't want, at the moment this site was given to private, could be open to private developer, but they are protecting this site to be used as a public plot for public building. So this is one aspect. And we were in Montenegro last month, I think, to understand also what's the future of it. So we we are waiting now for this change in the urban planning to move forward the design. But there is a strong intent, a strong will of bringing this proposal forward. It reminds me of what was happening in Hungary 5 years ago, where they did a lot of competition and they realized building like museum, library, and so on. So there is this kind of new political movement. Regarding the second question was tactic to design the design. Well, I think there are different ways to do it. First of all, what we do a lot is I don't think we are the kind of architect that try to fight with the client. We never trying to, as you can see here, compromise is the good way, but it's not a bad way of approaching the design. Sometimes it can enrich the design, right? But also understanding what are the real needs of the client, right? For example, in Bologna, we knew that we couldn't do anything special or incredible, but still we wanted to show that we understood that the building has to be cheap, and you can see even from the visual, they're not extremely decorated or extremely, expensive building. They are quite simple, small windows, no balcony, and I think this is part of the factuality of what you are trying to do. You have to compromise with the client. Sometimes, I hope the clients are not listening, but you have to cheat to bring some of your strong idea forward, right? Meaning you have to tell story in a different way. And I think the fact that you know more than for some aspect of your client can help, but is always for the good of the overall result, right? That you do that. So I think there is, it's in this hybrid zone, in this dialectic between the client and you, that you find the best solution in the design. And again, I think that's the fun part, because otherwise if we come with our idea, okay, we want the design like this, I think it's not, the building is successful also because it welcomes also other forces in a way.
Thank you. Are there more questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your lecture. It was truly inspiring. So on your third example on building ecosystems, so you mentioned a lot about like integrating the nature around it, and also like using elements from nature on the interiors as well. But I was just curious if that was to create some kind of an impact on the users psychologically, to enhance the nature around, or like to embrace the nature around, or something like that. How did you address that kind of an aspect in the design?
Thanks for the question. I think it's all the thing together, meaning that for sure there is an intent of keeping all those green portion of the city together and not to separate with a building or with something that portion of the city. So this is one aspect. On the other side, the psychological aspect, of course, but also the comfort. So the idea that a landscape could be designed in order to improve the comfort of the users. I didn't mention that the park that we designed had to embed also a botanical garden. So of course the psychological aspect is really important for the people, but also the real thermal comfort and the way you, I think another part is the identity. Once we went there, we were really surprised to see that people from Montenegro were really loved this idea, that it was almost like how do you interpret the place so well, which was quite for us was quite nice now to hear. So is also, I think it was also the concept of the nature there that was part of the, I would say, genius loci of the place, even if it's not, I don't think it's genius loci, it's only about that. But in general, I think it was fit for that area. So for all these reasons. But it's not, I don't think that it's the solution for everything. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that we use that as a tool to everywhere. So it's again, case by case.
Are there more questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you for this interesting presentation. Actually, at the end of your presentation, you just tell us about the different versions of the river, and you said that you're designing in relationship to the different versions of rivers. You know, now there's a quite serious situation where there are flooding and all over Europe, okay, and there are hundreds of people who are dying because of the flooding. So now there are many movements who say that do not build on the riverbeds. And if you're going to build on the riverbeds, how you will just design in a way that maybe absorb that flooding, but not accelerate it. So it's about, like, if you tell us more about how, if there's a strategy that you have taken in regards to the relationship of the flooding, and because you're building 3 monumental buildings, where I wonder if this will help absorbing the flooding or will accelerate it in a way or another. So this is my question.
Thanks. So let me go back to, okay. So our building was quite, we considered that a lot. So you can see here in this section, and it was part of the low tide and the high tide, right? So this high tide, it was almost 10 meters below our lower, let's say, level. And it was given by the brief as the highest level ever registered in the history of Montenegro. So in a way, we were clever in playing with that. What we did do is to create this kind of different, so allowing in a way for different part of the landscape, not of course of the building, to be flooded. So there are some part of that that could be flooded. But we were pretty safe from that point of view, because that was the kind of a safe, it was already set as a safe zone. And when I'm saying the brief was really well done, it also was covering this aspect in a more accurate way. So we didn't apply any particular strategy to prevent extremely exceptional flooding, but our building was, we wanted the building to be close to the river. And I think that's where you are trying to see why you put the building so close, because we think this idea that you see in the city of Podgorica, that is kind of almost, sorry, I'm trying to see here, almost trying to, this was the vernacular approach, right, to the city that was taking ownership of the river, and then all the other approach were almost, sorry, if I move this, it's floating. All the other approach were kind of giving the back. So I think this building was the new way of leaving the river. And yeah, from a technical point of view, we were kind of safe. I think that's the answer you want. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, thanks a lot for your presentation. Not only I appreciated like the vision, the overall vision, but also the right level of details. I mean, with the rationale you gave for everything. So maybe I'll ask maybe a dumb questions because I'm a designer, not an architect. But it sounds like because of all this rationale you gave, it sounds like there is a lot of research behind every project. So what have been the challenges like running, these big projects? Like, is all your work done internally in the studio, or some skills you had to learn throughout, or maybe did you have like any external suppliers to give maybe some kind of more specific reports or any insights to make this happen? Thank you.
Sure. In general, it's the big scale, and it's something we are comfortable with more than the small scale, because we have been always working on big projects, master plan, development. So in a way, it comes easier for us to do bigger projects than small. But of course, for every project we do, we work with consultants. And for example, Podgorica was a collaboration between us, Land, which is a big landscape office, Maffei's Engineering, and the Charcoal Blue from London on the space design and space activation and so on. So it's never a one-man show or a one-studio show. It's always, the project of Bologna, for example, was a collaboration with another architect and an engineering firm and a landscape architect. So, by the way, this architect was also a student of the SCD course with which we did the project. So for us, and we don't like that way, we don't like it to be just, oh, it's only me and we did this. But what we are good at is to coordinate big streams and to bring them into a cohesive and strong proposal. Because very often, I think that's the role of the architect, is to drive the buzz, right? And then the people can come on board, but it's the architect who has to drive, because when this doesn't happen, the projects are never strong as when an architect is the driver. And this is a reason also why we move away a little bit from the, I think our strength is also that we worked as environmental consultant, and this give us the opportunity to talk and know what to say to the different people. So engineer, myself, I am an engineer. In Italy, I'm an engineer, I have to admit. In here, I'm an architect. So this is kind of our way of working. It's embed this hybrid, process. So yes, of course. I mean, you alone, a project like this would be very difficult to develop alone, especially for a small practice like us. But also having experienced what's happening in the big practices, right? It's in big practices there are a lot of people working there. Not always they really focus on the specific project. Our strength is that we take the project and we work on it personally. The three of us always supervision of the project. So we never leave, and the reason why we don't want to grow is also that. We don't want to leave things unattended or unsolved. And that's where we are more challenging also we work with big practice as well. But as you can see, we do big projects mainly.
Anyone else?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really, really interesting. And also it gives hope that there is more and more buildings that go in that direction. I really like the A factor that you were showing. Mm-hmm. And I was curious to know how far do you push to some extent, or how far are you guys pushing on the for the environment part, and also what is the pool that you can fill. The kind of the reference that I'm thinking about is I know a bit about the biomimicry and how they really use nature's just natural system and ecosystem, and also they use the local context in terms of the habitat, the reference habitat, to really kind of look at it as services for water, for air filtering, etc. And yeah, I was wondering kind of how much do you see it giving back as well, which is a step further than sustainability, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I think we push in a way that we try to find that balance. We know there is this slide that comes very useful for clients and also for us, which is, sorry, let me go back like this. So this slide, it's where we have always our conversation with client. It's like, where do you want to go? Oh, I want to create a sustainable building. Yes, but where do you really want to go? You want to go here or you want to go there? So this is one aspect. So pushing means for us, for sure, I think even if we don't want, we have this background that we have learned here. I don't know if you have seen the previous project of CD from the students. There is a strong and very detailed understanding of climate and strategies to really improve, reduce carbon, and etc. Something that you will never see in practice because they spent 1.5 years on one project just trying to find all the little detail of it. And myself, when I did the project here, I've never matched that level of detail in the real profession because, of course, money, time, and so on and so on. But regardless, there is this understanding of how things work, and even if you don't do your 100 test simulation and things, there is overarching knowledge that it's the project will absorb for sure because it's there. And then I think the A factor, what we were calling the A factor, is basically that. Is pushing as much as you can, but then there is a level where this quadrant, this square, maybe go toward one direction or the other. As you can see in the project, for sure we want to say something, not being always trying to experiment a little bit, even if the project doesn't really it's not really done for that. We try to push one aspect or the other, but then there could be maybe buildability sometimes more than natural, energy saving or operational carbon. For example, like in the building of the cruise terminal, the operational carbon is an aspect, but at the same time, we were relying a lot on natural ventilation and these things. So we knew that the roof was something that could, and reducing solar radiation was something important. So the extent on which we designed that roof, then it's a balance between that and how much the roof costs if it's too deep. So I think that's where we factual, being factual and being factual means this. So focusing on all the aspects, but still. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else with a question? Well, if not, we can conclude. Thank you so much, Pierluigi. I think it was a very interesting and inspiring lecture, and you portrayed very well your journey with your successes and your challenges, and you were very sincere how you achieved.
I didn't mention the failures as well. There were many on the way. But
okay, so maybe in a few years you give another lecture. Thank you so much once again, and thank you all for staying.